the weakest species. The signal reached them on a quiet cycle. It wasn't unusual. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless primitive worlds sending out desperate radio waves into the void, signals of curiosity, loneliness, or arrogance. Most civilizations never made it past that stage. They burned out, destroyed themselves, or were quietly erased before ever joining the greater galactic community. So when the Galactic Council intercepted Earth's transmissions, no one expected anything remarkable. Just another fragile species. Just another hunt. Far above Earth's atmosphere, hidden beyond detection, a massive obsidian fleet drifted silently. The ships belonged to the Vrax Dominion, the most feared hunters in the known galaxy. They did not conquer for resources. They did not negotiate for alliances. They hunted. Entire civilizations had been wiped out simply because they provided entertainment. And Earth? Earth looked perfect. Inside the flagship, towering figures with armored exoskeletons studied holographic projections of human beings. Weak skeletal structure. Minimal natural weapons. Limited physical strength. Short lifespan. The analysis was unanimous. Classification, prey. A low rumble of approval echoed through the chamber. One of the Vrax commanders tilted its elongated head, observing footage of humans running, laughing, fighting among themselves. They are divided, it said. They lack unity. They lack discipline. They lack strength. Another responded. Then they will provide sport. And just like that, humanity was marked. The first strike came without warning. No dramatic speech. No declaration of war. Only fire. It began in the dead of night. Cities across the planet suddenly lit up, not with lights but with explosions. Massive beams of energy pierced through skyscrapers as if they were made of paper. Entire districts vanished in seconds. Communication networks collapsed. Satellites went dark. People didn't understand what was happening. They thought it was war. A new weapon. A mistake. But then the ships appeared. Gigantic silhouettes filled the sky. Black. Silent. Watching. And then, they descended. The Vrax hunters entered the streets like gods of destruction. Their bodies were massive, twice the size of a human, covered in natural armor that deflected bullets like rain. Their weapons weren't guns. They were tools of precision killing. They moved with purpose. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to hunt. At first, humanity fought back. Military forces mobilized within minutes. Jets scrambled. Tanks rolled. Missiles launched into the sky. For a brief moment, it looked like resistance might matter. Then the first Vrax warship fired. A single shot. An entire air fleet vanished. Panic spread faster than the destruction. Governments issued emergency broadcasts, but no one had answers. Cities burned. People fled in every direction. Families were separated. Entire regions fell silent. The hunters moved methodically. They didn't kill everyone. Only enough to create fear. Only enough to keep the hunt interesting. Some humans tried to hide. Others tried to fight. Most simply ran. But the Vrax, they adapted their tactics instantly. They tracked heat signatures, movement patterns, even human behavior. Every attempt at survival became predictable. Every escape route became a trap. Days passed. Then weeks. Humanity began to break. News spread of entire resistance groups being wiped out in minutes. Military strongholds reduced to ash. Even the strongest nations fell one by one. The message became clear. There was no winning this. And yet, something didn't add up. Deep within the ruins of a destroyed city, one Vrax hunter stood over a captured human. The human was injured, bleeding, exhausted. By all logic, defeated. The hunter raised its weapon, scanning the human's vitals. Weak, fragile, near death. Exactly as expected. But then, the human started laughing. It was quiet at first. A soft, broken sound. But unmistakable. The Vrax hunter froze. Its sensors recalibrated, unsure if this was some kind of malfunction. The human looked up. Blood running down his face. Eyes locked onto the towering alien. And he smiled. Not fear. Not desperation. A smile. "You think this is over?" the human whispered. The Vrax tilted its head, analyzing tone, expression, neural activity. Confusion. This response didn't match any known prey behavior. "You don't get it," the human continued, voice shaking, but not with fear. With something else. Something unfamiliar. The hunter leaned closer. Curious. "You made a mistake." For the first time since the invasion began. A Vrax hunter hesitated. Because the human wasn't begging. Wasn't pleading. Wasn't afraid. He was certain. We're not the strongest, the human said. We're not the fastest. We're not even close. A weak cough escaped him. But the smile didn't fade. But you don't survive on a planet like ours by giving up. The Vrax weapon charged. A low hum filled the air. We adapt. The word echoed. Not loudly. But it lingered. For reasons the hunter could not explain. It paused. Just for a fraction of a second. And that moment was all it took. A sudden explosion tore through the street. Debris flew in every direction as a hidden charge detonated beneath the hunter's feet. The blast wasn't enough to kill it, but it staggered. From the shadows, gunfire erupted. Not random. Not desperate. Precise. The Vrax turned, reacting instantly, but something was different. The humans weren't running. They were coordinated. Focused. A group emerged, small, armed, moving as one. Not soldiers. Not trained warriors. Survivors. They grabbed the injured man, pulling him away as smoke filled the area. The Vrax fired, but the shots missed. Not because of error. Because the humans anticipated them. Within seconds, they were gone. The hunter stood alone in the ruins. Damaged. Confused. It replayed the encounter. Analyzed every movement. Every word. We adapt. The phrase repeated in its processing core. Again. And again. Across the planet, similar reports began to surface. Humans changing tactics. Learning patterns. Setting traps. Small victories. Insignificant losses. But something was happening. Something the Vrax had never encountered before. They had hunted thousands of species. And every single one had reacted the same way. Fear. Panic. Submission. But this one was different. Humanity wasn't just surviving. It was learning. And somewhere deep within the command ship, for the first time since the hunt began, a new classification was being considered. Not prey. Something else. The Vrax Dominion had one absolute belief. Every species breaks. It wasn't arrogance. It was experience. They had hunted across star systems, across centuries, across civilizations far more advanced than Earth, and every single one had collapsed the same way. Fear first. Then chaos. Then extinction. But Earth was beginning to disobey that pattern. Inside the Vrax flagship, tension rippled through the command chamber. Massive holographic projections flickered, showing fragments of something unexpected. Failed hunts. Interrupted executions. Vanishing targets. A Vrax commander stepped forward, its voice low and edged with something dangerously close to irritation. Report. A subordinate responded, its tone precise but strained. Multiple hunting units have encountered resistance beyond predicted parameters. The chamber fell silent. That phrase, beyond predicted parameters, was not one they used lightly. Another hologram appeared. Footage from a hunter's visor. A human settlement, ruined, burning, silent. The hunter advanced, scanning. No life signs. No movement. Perfect hunting conditions. Then, an explosion. The footage distorted violently. Hidden traps triggered in sequence. Shockwaves, collapsing structures, focused blasts aimed not to destroy but to disorient. The hunter staggered. And then the humans emerged. Not panicked. Not scattered. Organized. They moved through smoke and debris like they had rehearsed it. One group drew the hunter's attention. Another flanked. A third struck from above. The footage ended abruptly. Signal lost. Hunter terminated. Back in the chamber, silence deepened. Impossible, one commander growled. They lacked the physical capability. Another responded. Then they compensate. The words lingered. Uncomfortable. Because that wasn't how prey behaved. On Earth, the shift had already begun. The first weeks of the invasion had been chaos. Cities destroyed. Governments fractured. Billions lost. But humanity had something the Vrax had underestimated. Not strength. Not technology. Time. Time to learn. Time to adapt. Time to fight back. In the underground ruins of what used to be a major city, a group of survivors gathered around a flickering holographic display. It wasn't advanced. It wasn't perfect. But it was enough. At the center stood the same man from before, the one who had laughed in the face of a Vrax hunter. Bruised. Exhausted. Alive. His name didn't matter. Not anymore. Because he wasn't just a man now. He was becoming something else. A symbol. Play it again, he said. The footage replayed. Every movement of the Vrax hunter. Every reaction. Every microsecond of delay. They studied it like scientists dissecting a new element. They're fast, one of the survivors said. Stronger than us, another added. The man nodded. Yeah, but not perfect. He pointed at the projection. A tiny moment, barely noticeable. Right there. The group leaned closer. It hesitates, he said. Not long, but long enough. Why? Someone asked. The man's expression hardened. Because we're not acting the way they expect. Silence. They've done this before, he continued. They think they know us already. They think we'll run. Panic. Scatter. He looked around the room. At tired faces. At people who had lost everything. So we stopped doing that. Across the planet, similar conversations were happening. Small groups. Isolated survivors. Broken remnants of military units. But they were all arriving at the same conclusion. The Vrax weren't invincible. They were predictable. The next encounter proved it. A Vrax hunting squad entered a forested region, tracking a cluster of human life signs. Standard procedure. Routine. They moved silently through the trees. Scanning. Analyzing. Targets located. But something was off. The signals weren't moving. Not fleeing. Waiting. The squad leader paused. A flicker of uncertainty. Then, the ground collapsed beneath them. Spiked trenches. Camouflaged pits. Explosives placed with surgical precision. The forest came alive. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Traps triggered in sequence. Noise. Light. Chaos. But this chaos wasn't random. It was controlled. The humans weren't trying to overpower the Vrax. They were overwhelming their senses. Separating them. Disorienting them. One by one. The hunters fell. Not easily. Not cleanly. But they fell. Back in orbit. The Vrax Dominion began to understand something was wrong. Losses were increasing. Not dramatically. Not yet. But enough. Enough to raise a question that had never been asked before. What if this species doesn't break? The idea was dismissed immediately. Of course they would break. They always did. But doubt, once introduced, doesn't disappear. On Earth, the man stood at the edge of a ruined highway watching the sky. Above him, the Vrax ships still hovered. Untouched. Dominant. But no longer unquestioned. A young survivor approached him. We won today, she said. The man didn't smile. No, he replied quietly. We survived today. He turned, looking at the growing group behind him. More people. More fighters. More minds learning, adapting, evolving. Winning comes later. Far above. Inside the flagship. A new order was issued. Not public. Not announced. But clear. Increase hunter deployment. Escalate force. End resistance. Because the Vrax had made a decision. A critical one. They believed humanity was still prey. Just difficult prey. And that belief would become their first real mistake. On the surface of Earth. The man looked at the group one last time before moving out. They think they understand us, someone said. He shook his head. No. A faint, dangerous smile appeared. They think we've stopped changing. He picked up a salvaged alien weapon. Adjusted it. Modified. Improved. That's the problem. He looked back at the burning horizon. We're just getting started. The Vrax Dominion had faced resistance before. Rebellions. Last stands. Desperate, doomed defiance from species that refused to accept extinction. But this was different. Resistance wasn't fading. It was evolving. And evolution was something the Vrax had never needed to fear. Until now. Far above Earth, inside the command vessel, the atmosphere had changed. Not visibly. Not openly. But it was there. A subtle tension. A quiet unease. Because the reports kept coming. Not of victories. But of anomalies. Hunter Unit 47, lost. Hunter Unit 92, signal terminated. Scout divisions, ambushed. The numbers were still small. Insignificant compared to the Dominion's full strength. But the pattern was growing. A Vrax strategist stood before the council, projecting a rotating hologram of Earth's surface. Red markers blinked across continents. Human activity. Resistance zones. Ambush sites. They are adapting, the strategist said. A low growl echoed through the chamber. All prey adapts, one commander replied. It delays the inevitable. The strategist paused. Not like this. The hologram shifted, zooming into a specific encounter. A Vrax hunter advanced through urban ruins. Scanning. Calculating. Then, the humans attacked. But not with randomness. Not with desperation. With precision. They targeted joints in the armor. Weak points in movement. Blind spots in sensor range. They weren't guessing. They knew. On Earth, that knowledge had been earned. Every loss. Every failure. Every life taken by the hunters had taught humanity something. And humans, they didn't waste lessons. In a hidden underground facility, deep beneath layers of collapsed concrete and steel, the resistance had built something new. Not a base. Not a shelter. A workshop. Alien weapons lay scattered across tables. Disassembled. Studied. Rebuilt. The man stood over one of them, tools in hand. Carefully adjusting the inner mechanisms of a Vrax energy rifle. Power source here, he muttered. Too unstable for continuous use, but... He made an adjustment. The weapon hummed. Then stabilized. Not for us. A nearby survivor raised an eyebrow. You just fixed alien tech? The man shrugged slightly. Didn't fix it. He lifted the weapon. A faint glow pulsing along its frame. Improved it. That was the difference. The Vrax created tools for efficiency. For dominance. For control. Humans? They created tools to survive. And survival demanded creativity. The next encounter proved just how far that creativity could go. A Vrax strike team entered a dense urban zone. Standard formation. Perfect synchronization. They had adapted to. Adjusting tactics to counter human ambushes. But they were still following a pattern. And humans had learned to see patterns. High above the streets, hidden among the ruins of a shattered skyscraper, the man watched. Beside him, a small team prepared. Modified weapons. Improvised explosives. Hand signals instead of words. No panic. No fear. Only focus. Wait, one whispered. The Vrax squad moved below. Scanning. Calculating. Wait. They reached the center of the zone. Now. The world exploded into motion. Not chaos. Controlled chaos. Explosions triggered in a precise sequence, cutting off escape routes, isolating each Vrax hunter from the others. Smoke filled the streets. Signal interference activated. The hunters reacted instantly, but their coordination was gone. Separated. And that's when the humans struck. The man dropped from above, landing behind one of the hunters. Before it could turn, he fired. Not at the chest. Not at the armor. At the joint behind the neck. The shot pierced through. The hunter collapsed. Across the battlefield, similar strikes unfolded. Humans moved fast. Not faster than the Vrax, but smarter. They didn't try to match strength. They avoided it. They didn't try to overpower. They outmaneuvered. Within minutes, the fight was over. The Vrax strike team, eliminated. Silence fell over the ruins. Heavy. Unreal. One of the survivors looked around, breathing hard. We actually did it. Another shook their head in disbelief. That was a full squad. The man said nothing. He simply looked at the fallen hunters. Studying them. Learning. Even in victory. Because this wasn't the end. Not even close. Far above. The Vrax command vessel registered the loss. Another unit. Gone. But this time, it wasn't dismissed. This is no longer random resistance, the strategist said. The chamber remained silent. This is coordinated. Evolving. Learning. One of the commanders stepped forward. Its voice colder than before. Then we escalate. New orders spread across the fleet. More hunters. More force. More destruction. Because the Vrax had finally recognized something. Not fully. Not completely. But enough to act. Humanity was no longer just surviving. It was becoming dangerous. On Earth, the man stood once more beneath the burning sky. But this time, he wasn't looking up in fear. He was calculating. Planning. Adapting. A young fighter approached him. They're sending more, she said. He nodded. Good. She frowned. Good? A faint smile returned. More means they're worried. He picked up the modified weapon, checking its charge. And when your enemy starts worrying... He looked toward the horizon, where distant ships hovered like silent giants. It means you've already changed the game. Above them, inside the cold depths of the Vrax flagship, a new classification was being discussed. Quietly. Reluctantly. Not prey. Not yet equal. But something else. Something unknown. Something unpredictable. And in war, there is nothing more dangerous than something you cannot predict. The Vrax Dominion did not believe in fear. Fear was for prey. Fear was weakness. Fear was the moment a species realized it was already dead. And yet, something unfamiliar had begun to spread through their ranks. Not panic. Not yet. But doubt. It started small. A delay in reaction time. A hesitation before entering a structure. A second glance at empty shadows. For most species, these things meant nothing. For the Vrax, they meant everything. Inside the flagship, the command chamber no longer felt like a place of certainty. The holographic map of Earth had changed. Before, it had been simple. Red zones, areas of extermination. Clean, efficient, controlled. Now, the red was shrinking, and something else was appearing. Small, scattered, but growing. Blue. Human-controlled zones. Explain this. The voice of a high commander echoed through the chamber, sharp and cold. The strategist stepped forward again. But this time, there was no confidence in its tone. Human resistance has begun reclaiming territory. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Reclaiming? Another commander repeated. From us. The strategist didn't respond immediately, because there was no way to soften the truth. Yes. A low, threatening vibration spread through the chamber. Impossible, one growled. We do not lose territory. But the data didn't lie. Entire sectors, once cleared, were now active again. Human activity. Human coordination. Human control. And worse, Vrax hunters were avoiding those areas. Not by command. By instinct. On Earth, the shift was undeniable. What had once been survival was becoming resistance. And what had been resistance was turning into something far more dangerous. Control. In the ruins of a once devastated city, people were returning. Not civilians. Not yet. But fighters. Builders. Thinkers. They moved through broken streets, setting up defenses, establishing supply lines, creating something that hadn't existed since the invasion began. Stability. At the center of it all, the man stood watching. The same man who had laughed in the face of a hunter. But he wasn't the same anymore. His movements were sharper. His eyes more focused. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was planning. Perimeters holding, someone reported. Scouts confirmed no Vrax movement within range. The man nodded slowly. They're watching, he said. A young fighter frowned. Then why aren't they attacking? The man's gaze shifted toward the skyline, toward the silent ships above. Because they're learning too. That was the truth neither side could ignore anymore. This wasn't a hunt. Not anymore. It was a war of adaptation. The next Vrax deployment was different. No longer small hunting squads. This time, they came in force. Heavy units. Armored elites. Advanced weaponry. They didn't come to hunt. They came to erase. The target? A human-controlled zone. One of the first. The sky darkened as Vrax dropships descended. The ground trembled with their arrival. This wasn't subtle. This was a message. Inside the city, humans prepared. Not with panic. With precision. Positions. The man's voice was calm. Steady. Fighters moved into place. Hidden. Waiting. The Vrax advanced. Perfect formation. Unstoppable force. And then, the first shot was fired. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. The Vrax expected chaos. They expected desperation. They expected prey. What they got was strategy. Explosions ripped through their formation, not random but calculated to disrupt movement patterns. Snipers targeted exposed joints. Modified alien weapons tore through armor in ways the Vrax had never anticipated. The humans weren't just fighting. They were executing a plan. Every move the Vrax made was predicted, countered, punished, one by one. The elite units fell. And for the first time in recorded Vrax history, a full assault force was wiped out. Silence followed. Not just on Earth, but in orbit. Inside the flagship. No one spoke. Because no one had prepared for this. This is no longer acceptable, a commander finally said. But the words felt weaker than before. Less certain. The strategist stepped forward one last time. We underestimated them. That admission alone was unthinkable. They are not reacting to us anymore, the strategist continued. They are anticipating us. Another pause. Longer this time. Then we changed the rules, a commander said. On Earth, the battlefield had gone quiet. Smoke drifted through the ruined streets. Bodies, human and Vrax alike, lay scattered across the ground. The survivors stood among them, breathing hard, exhausted, but alive. They'll come back, someone said. The man nodded. Yeah. He looked around, at what they had built, at what they had defended. And next time, a slow, dangerous certainty settled into his voice. They won't come as hunters. He turned, staring directly at the sky. They'll come afraid. Far above, inside the cold, silent depths of the Vrax flagship, a new command was issued. Not for hunting, not for sport, but for something far more final. Initiate total extermination protocol. Because the Vrax Dominion had realized something. Too late. The species would not break, and now, they were starting to fear it. The order spread across the Vrax fleet in absolute silence. No ceremony. No hesitation. Total extermination protocol. It had only been used a handful of times in the Dominion's history. Not for weak species. Not for prey. But for threats. Above Earth the fleet shifted. Massive warships repositioned, their formations tightening into something far more aggressive. Energy signatures spiked across the void. Weapons, planetary-scale weapons, began charging. This was no longer a hunt. This was eradication. On the surface, humanity felt it before they understood it. The sky changed. A low, unnatural hum vibrated through the atmosphere. Satellites, what remained of them, went dark. Electrical systems flickered. Even the air felt wrong. In the command center of the largest human-controlled zone, alarms began to scream. Energy surge detected in orbit. Multiple ships, no, the entire fleet, charging weapons. The room fell into chaos. How long? Someone shouted. A technician stared at the readings, face pale. Minutes. Silence. Because everyone in that room understood what that meant. They weren't targeting cities anymore. They were targeting the planet. The man stood at the center of it all. So focused, as if the chaos around him couldn't touch him. Evacuation? Someone asked, desperation creeping into their voice. He shook his head. There's nowhere to go. Another voice. Then we fight. The man looked at them. Really looked. At the fear. The anger. The exhaustion. Then he said something that silenced the entire room. No. Confusion spread instantly. No, the young fighter stepped forward. They're about to wipe us out. He nodded. I know. Then what do we do? Pause. And then, a shift. For the first time since the invasion began. The man smiled. But it wasn't defiance. It wasn't desperation. It was realization. We stop reacting. Silence. We stop defending. The room froze. And we take the fight to them. For a moment, no one spoke. Because the idea was insane. Impossible. Unthinkable. And yet, no one dismissed it. Because everything else they had done, everything that shouldn't have worked, had worked. How? Someone finally asked. The man turned toward the central display, where the Vrax fleet hovered in orbit. Untouchable. Dominant. They think the sky is theirs, he said quietly. His eyes narrowed. Let's prove them wrong. Hours later, humanity made its move. Not with massive ships. Not with overwhelming force. But with something far more dangerous. Precision. From hidden locations across the planet, small launch systems activated. Not missiles. Pods. Compact. Armored. Modified using stolen Vrax technology. Inside each one, a human. Volunteers. No guarantee of survival. No promise of return. Only one objective. Get into orbit. The launches began. Dozens of pods shot into the sky. Then hundreds. Fast. Unpredictable. The Vrax detected them instantly. Incoming objects, multiple trajectories. At first they dismissed them. Primitive. Insignificant. Then the pods started maneuvering. Not randomly. Intelligently. Dodging interception fire. Adjusting paths mid-flight. They're targeting us, a Vrax officer said, confusion creeping into its voice. Confusion. That same unfamiliar feeling. The first pod reached a ship. It didn't explode. It attached. Then, cut through. Inside the Vrax vessel. Alarms erupted. Boarding breach detected. That had never happened before. Never. The hatch blew open. And the humans entered. Not as prey. As hunters. Across the fleet. The same scenario unfolded. Pods attaching. Breaches forming. Humans flooding into ships that had once seemed untouchable. The Vrax were stronger. Faster. But they weren't prepared. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Inside one of the largest warships. The man stepped through the breach. Weapon in hand. Eyes focused. The air was different here. Foreign. Cold. But he didn't hesitate. Move, he ordered. His team advanced behind him. Every step forward was history being rewritten, because for the first time, humanity wasn't fighting for survival. They were taking control. Back on Earth, the sky was still filled with enemy ships, still dangerous, still deadly. But something had changed. For the first time since the invasion began, the battlefield wasn't just on the ground, it was everywhere. And the Vrax Dominion had just lost its greatest advantage. Because the moment humans reached the stars, the hunt was over. Inside the flagship, the highest commanders watched as their fleet, once perfect, once untouchable, began to fall into chaos. "This is impossible," one whispered. But no one corrected it, because they were all seeing the same thing, the same truth. They had miscalculated. Not just once, but from the very beginning. On the warship, the man paused for a moment, looking out through a fractured viewport at Earth below. Burnt, scarred, but still alive. His reflection stared back at him. Not the same person who had laughed in the ruins. Something more. Something dangerous. He turned back toward the interior of the ship. Toward the enemy. "Let's finish this," he said. The hunt reversed. The moment the first Vrax warship fell, the galaxy changed. It didn't happen all at once. There was no explosion visible across the stars. No single event that marked the shift. But those who were watching knew. Because something impossible had just occurred. The hunters were losing. Across the Vrax fleet, chaos spread like a virus. Ships that had once moved in perfect, synchronized precision were now fractured, isolated conflicts erupting within their own hulls. Boarding alarms echoed endlessly. Systems failed. Command structures collapsed. For the first time in their history, the Vrax were fighting on the inside. Inside one of the warships, the man moved through dim, flickering corridors. The alien architecture twisted around him, cold, metallic, unfamiliar. But none of that mattered, because war was universal. A Vrax warrior lunged from the shadows. Fast, precise, deadly. The man didn't try to match it. He stepped aside. Fired once. The shot hit the exact weak point behind the creature's shoulder joint. The Vrax collapsed instantly. Behind him, his team advanced. They weren't the same people who had once run through burning streets. They were sharper now. More controlled. Each movement had purpose. Each action had intent. "Clear," one of them said. The man nodded. "Keep moving. Don't give them time to regroup." That was the key. The Vrax relied on structure. Order. Hierarchy. Break that. And everything else followed. Across the fleet, the same strategy unfolded. Humans didn't try to overpower the ships. They dismantled them. Power systems sabotaged. Navigation disrupted. Weapons turned inward. The Vrax had built their empire on control. And now, that control was slipping away. On the flagship, the command chamber was no longer calm. It was unstable. Multiple ships unresponsive. Internal breaches across sectors. Human presence confirmed on. The report cut off. Silence followed. One of the highest commanders stepped forward. His voice, different now. Not anger. Not dominance. Something else. "They are spreading." No one argued. Because it was true. The humans weren't just attacking. They were multiplying. From ship to ship. From system to system. A strategist spoke, quieter than before. "They are using our own fleet as a network." That realization hit harder than any weapon. Because it meant one thing. There was nowhere left to contain them. Back inside the warship, the man reached a central control chamber. Screens flickered around him. Alien symbols scrolled rapidly. One of his team members approached. "We've got partial control," she said. "Weapons, navigation, some of it's responding." The man stepped forward, studying the interface. "Good," he said. He placed his hand on the console. Not as someone unfamiliar, but as someone who had learned. Adapted. "Then let's send a message." Moments later, a Vrax warship turned. Not away from Earth, but toward the rest of the fleet. Energy built along its weapons. Charging. Inside the flagship, alarms screamed. "Weapon systems, one of our ships is targeting us. Disable it." But it was too late. The shot fired. A massive beam of energy tore through space, striking another Vrax vessel directly. The explosion lit up the void. Silence followed. Because the unthinkable had just happened. The Vrax fleet was destroying itself. Across the battlefield in orbit, more ships began to turn. One by one. Controlled. Redirected. Repurposed. Humanity wasn't just fighting anymore. They were taking over. On Earth, people looked up at the sky, at the same ships that had once brought destruction. And now, they were watching them fall. Hope, something that had nearly vanished, began to return. Not as a feeling, as certainty. Inside the flagship, the highest commander stood still, watching everything collapse. For the first time in its existence, it understood something fundamental. This was never supposed to happen. Not to them. Not to the Vrax Dominion. And yet, here it was. Prepare a direct response, it ordered. His voice had changed, hardened, focused. Locate the source. Because now, this wasn't about extermination. It was personal. Back on the captured warship, the man looked at the data streaming across the console. Enemy positions, command signals, and one central location, the flagship. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not out of arrogance, not out of anger, but because he understood something the Vrax still didn't. This was never about survival. Not anymore. It was about ending the threat. Completely. He turned to his team. That ship, he said, pointing to the flagship. That's where this ends. Pause. Then one of them asked, "You sure?" He nodded. Yeah. His grip tightened on the weapon. Because that's where it started. Outside, the stars burned quietly. But the balance of power had already shifted. The hunters were no longer in control. And the prey had become something far more dangerous. Something unstoppable. Protocol. The flagship loomed above everything. Massive. Silent. Untouched. Even as the rest of the Vrax fleet burned. Even as their ships turned against each other. That one vessel remained steady. Because it wasn't just another warship. It was the center. The mind. The will of the Vrax Dominion. And both sides knew it. Inside the captured warship, the man stood at the command console, eyes locked onto the projection of the flagship. Every instinct told him the same thing. End that, and you end this war. Behind him, his team prepared. Weapons charged. Armor secured. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to say. They all understood. This wasn't just another mission. This was the last one. Set course, the man said quietly. The ship responded. Turning. Aligning directly with the heart of the Vrax Dominion. Across space, the flagship reacted instantly. Incoming vessel, human-controlled. Inside its command chamber, the highest commander stood motionless. Watching. Calculating. They are coming to us, a subordinate said. A long pause followed. Then slowly, the commander stepped forward. Let them. The distance between the two ships closed rapidly. No evasive maneuvers. No hesitation. Just a direct path toward the inevitable. On Earth, millions watched. Through broken systems. Through hacked signals. Through whatever remained. Because for the first time since the invasion began, humanity could see the end. Inside the human-controlled warship, the man took one last look at his team. No backup, someone said quietly. He nodded. We knew that. Another voice. No way out. A small pause. Then, we make one. A faint smile passed between them. Not fearless, but ready. Docking in 10 seconds, the system announced. The air grew heavier. Each second stretched longer than the last. 5, 4, 3. Impact. The ship connected with the flagship's hull. Metal screamed. Energy surged. And then, silence. Breach ready, someone said. The man stepped forward. Weapon raised. Let's finish it. The breach exploded inward. And humanity entered the heart of the Vrax Dominion. The corridors inside the flagship were unlike anything they had seen before. Wider. Darker. More alive. But none of that slowed them. The Vrax were waiting. Elite warriors. The strongest of their kind. This was no ambush. This was a final stand. The battle began instantly. The Vrax charged. Faster than anything the humans had faced before. Stronger. More precise. But humanity had evolved. Every movement the Vrax made was expected. Every strike, anticipated. The humans didn't fight harder. They fought smarter. They broke formations, separated targets, exploited every weakness they had learned. One by one, the elite warriors fell. Not easily, not quickly, but inevitably. At the center of the flagship, a massive chamber opened, and there, it waited. The Vrax High Commander, larger than the others, more armored, more powerful. It stepped forward slowly. You should not exist, it said. Its voice wasn't angry. It was confused. The man lowered his weapon slightly. Not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. We didn't plan to, he replied. Silence filled the chamber. You were prey, the commander said. The man shook his head. That's where you went wrong. The commander attacked. Fast. Blindingly fast. But the man moved. Not faster. Better. He dodged the strike. Redirected the momentum. Fired. Not at the armor. At the weakness. The commander staggered. But didn't fall. It adapted. For the first time. It learned. The two circled each other. Predator and predator. Because now, they were equals. The final exchange was short. Violent. Decisive. The commander lunged. The man stepped forward. Not back. A risk. A calculation. A decision. He took the hit. But in that moment, he fired. Point blank. The shot pierced through the exact weak point. The commander froze. Then slowly, collapsed. Silence. Absolute. The Vrax Dominion had just lost its core. Across the fleet, everything stopped. Ships drifted. Weapons powered down. The system that had controlled everything was gone. On Earth, the sky cleared. For the first time in weeks, there was no fire, no destruction, only silence. Inside the flagship, the man stood over the fallen commander, breathing heavily, injured, but alive. He looked around, at the ship, at the war, at everything that had happened. Then he spoke, not to his team, not to the ship, but to the galaxy, because he knew they were watching. You came here to hunt us. His voice echoed through the silent chamber. You thought we were weak. Pause. You thought we would break. He looked down at the fallen commander. Then back up. You were wrong. He activated the flagship's communication system, broadcasting across every reachable system. We are not prey. Another pause. We adapt. His voice hardened. And if you come for us, a final breath, we will end you. The signal spread. Across systems. Across species. Across the entire known galaxy. And for the first time, humanity wasn't unknown. It was understood. Days later, the remains of the Vrax fleet drifted silently in orbit. Some destroyed. Some abandoned. All defeated. Humanity had survived. No, humanity had won. But the galaxy had changed. Some species watched in fear. Others in awe. Because a new truth had been written into the stars. Not by strength. Not by power. But by something far more dangerous. Adaptation. And as humanity began to rebuild, to rise, to step beyond its own world, one final message echoed in the silence of space. A warning. A promise. A truth the galaxy would never forget. Humans don't lose. They learn. They adapt. And then, they win. Rocket fire.